The 2016 reboot of Doom ignored many modern trends in first-person shooters and returned to old core values of the genre. In doing so, it won back many fans, like myself, who had given up on first-person shooters in the era of Call of Duty. Doom 2016 perfectly blended traditional 90s shooter design with modern technology. Instead of linear cinematic corridor action, it was a fast, challenging bullet spree with the right amount of exploration and platforming. And the story remained optional, presented through menus rather than cutscenes. Similar to the original titles, it was all about pick up and play. At the same time, alongside this old school approach, it also took advantage of modern speed and controls. However, Doom 2016 left room for improvements, in particular in enemy and stage variety. So in theory, the sequels, Doom Eternal and The Dark Ages, had the potential to significantly build on the reboot. But despite still being quality first-person shooters, these games took some weird turns, which kind of missed the point of what made 2016 so refreshing. Let's start with Doom Eternal, where the level design is in fact much more varied and offers many diverse combat scenarios on top of intense platforming and parkour elements. It's also full of heavy metal set pieces that are absolutely worth seeing. However, the overall game design in Eternal also came with unexpected inconsistencies. Doom 2016 was a pick up and play experience, which even made fun of other shooters at the time with their focus on storytelling and over-reliance on handholding, as the Doomslayer was seemingly just as annoyed as the players by all the attempts of the NPCs to interrupt the gameplay. I knew something was off in Eternal when the game kept reminding me with intrusive warnings that I mustn't play offline and that I needed to turn on the internet at once. A first sign that maybe this wasn't such an old school experience anymore. You might not notice it during your first playthrough, but if you switch back to Doom 2016 after a long session of Eternal, it's striking how much cleaner 2016 looks and feels. Doom Eternal has much more visual chunk on screen, like those internet notifications. The icons and markers are more intrusive, the UI feels more cluttered, and there's longer cutscenes interrupting the gameplay. The gameplay itself was arguably even faster and more vertical than before, but the way it presented itself, Eternal took somewhat of the opposite approach of Doom 2016. Despite having its own share of visual noise, the original game of the reboot came with a relatively clean UI and focused more on player agency, whereas Eternal fell back into some of modern gaming's more tiring tropes and lost some of the focus on the way. Despite its fast pace and high difficulty, Doom 2016 always remained clear to read and intuitive to play. Each weapon had normal shots and one special attack to choose, which you activated with the shoulder button, on top of a couple of permanent supporting tools like the chainsaw, which could destroy one enemy for free on a separate button. One striking innovation was the finishing move against lower health enemies, which you activated with the same command that also opened doors and activated machines during exploration, which made it a very natural extension of the gameplay. 2016 was clearly more advanced than the original Pixel games, but the gameplay loop felt just as intuitive as those more seemingly simple titles. It struck the perfect balance between old and new. Eternal, on the other hand, multiplies these essential mechanics and becomes more convoluted. You now have a super punching attack, a flamethrower, and a grenade launcher with different elemental grenades, in addition to the chainsaw and other finishing moves, and also a lightsaber. Not to mention new abilities to activate, like hook shots and slow motion jumps. This doesn't make the game feel more complex, only more complicated, because each of these mechanics has its own button or combo, despite kinda doing similar things. The chainsaw and lightsaber are both instant kills as well as the super punch or the returning BFG. So you've got at least 4 pretty samey rescue maneuvers that have different button combos to activate. The lightsaber in particular was disappointing. It's like a second chainsaw instead of offering new gameplay. The flamethrower provides new tactics in the battlefield by creating different item drops, but could have easily been linked to the chainsaw or other weapons as an upgrade upgrades instead of occupying its own button. There's also a new dash for Eternal's increased focus on platforming. Now this makes sense to be an extra feature with a dedicated button assignment, as the platforming mechanics are a distinct gameplay mechanic. Just like with its overloaded combat mechanics, Doom Eternal's menu design is pretty cluttered, which goes hand in hand with redundant RPG systems. To be fair, I already felt that 2016 had some redundancies. You've got one screen to level up the weapon abilities and one screen for health and resistances, plus a different menu for unlockable buffs. But here too, Eternal multiplies the essentials just for the sake of it and loses the more elegant balance of 2016 by making these menus even more bloated. There isn't any good reason to have all these different skill trees which could easily fit under a single umbrella. But one of the biggest problems for me is the handholding. Before you fight a new enemy type or a new boss, the game shows you video tutorials. I can't think of any other game before Eternal with such a penetrating handholding approach. Another striking contrast to Doom 2016's old school approach. Imagine having to read a walkthrough before starting the final boss of a role-playing game. This is kind of what Doom Eternal does, and to me it felt unheard of. On top of that, if you die a couple of times, the game keeps asking you to turn on a God mode. Now here comes the crux. Some might argue that Doom Eternal simply has a higher skill ceiling, which I can accept. I still very much enjoyed the challenge of individual battle arenas, which somewhat preserved the spirit of 2016, even if it went a bit overboard with individual mechanics. But this creates a discrepancy with all the hand-holding and cluttered UI. Eternal is demanding, but at the same time treats players as if they have never had a controller in their hands. Be it with these constant tutorial videos, map icons trying to position you in the right direction, forcing the story on the player with linear cutscenes, the game constantly asking you to enable the God modes, activate online features and so on. It just doesn't fit together. It's like a very confused game, which doesn't know whether it wants to be a hardcore shooter or a casual player's first shooter. Doom: The Dark Ages feels less like a direct successor to Doom Eternal and more like the real follow-up to Doom 2016. The developers went back to the drawing board and thought about an entirely different direction they could take with the base concept of the original reboot. They discarded most of the essentials of Doom Eternal and reworked what a successor to 2016 could look like, in my opinion for the better. While Doom Eternal felt like it tried to be a playable version of Gun Fu, in Dark Ages you play something akin to a very agile tank based on some of the base movements of 2016. Don't be mistaken, Dark Ages can be as frantic as Eternal and requires your focus on multiple mechanics and elements on the battlefield. But whereas the combat in Eternal eventually started to feel a little random due to all the convoluted mechanics and a not very intuitive button layout, the gameplay flow in Dark Ages feels more natural to interact with. That's mainly because many of these combat elements are tied to one core mechanic, which is the Doomslayer's new shield. This thing can deflect incoming laser shots, parry attacks, dismantle enemy armor, stun enemies by throwing it in their face, ram through cannon fodder like a boulder, and prepare for counterattacks, resulting in intense close combat encounters against bigger demons, all while you manage resources and keep the battlefield clear of smaller grunts. Besides that, traditional firearms now all come with a Shattershot variant to get rid of bigger hordes creeping up on you, creating all the right Serious Sam vibes in my book. It's an intense gameplay loop with more core elements than in Doom 2016, but unlike Eternal, the carnage feels less arbitrary because the core mechanics involving the shield are tied to the left shoulder buttons. The same side the Doomslayer holds the shield, while the right side controls your firearms and close encounter attacks. Between battles, the new mechanic is also constantly used for small puzzles and parkour, which further cements it into muscle memory. The only thing I don't understand is why they mapped the command to pick up items and open machines to a new separate button, because it felt pretty natural in 2016 and Eternal, where it shared the R3 command with hand-to-hand combat, though ultimately this change doesn't affect the gameplay flow overall. I also really like how this new approach of equipping the Doomslayer with high-tech knight armor also is a perfect excuse to give the series techno-medieval backdrops, which are a refreshing change from all the stages set in Hell or on Mars, and further highlight the unique identity of this particular sequel. In theory, I might prefer the overall concept and feel even to Doom 2016, but sadly there are some remaining grievances I have with Dark Ages, which we'll get to in a minute. I won't lie, I didn't expect much from this game. During the promotion of it, and after some weird design choices in Eternal, it almost felt like fans of 2016 like me had a very different interpretation of what made that game so engaging and refreshing. While it appeared that the Doomslayer, literally kicking story exposition and tutorial dialogue straight in the face, was a mockery of redundant storytelling in action games,
Carefully release the hinges.
apparently the developers had the opposite in mind.
The story of Doom: The Dark Ages, like everything else in the game, is big. It's easier to access now as we've taken the narrative out of the codex and into the cutscenes.
But shockingly enough, even though I think that long-winded cutscenes are a poor fit for a series like Doom, almost not a single moment of storytelling is mandatory. You can skip nearly all of it, so you can get through Dark Ages with fewer story interruptions than even Doom 2016. I haven't seen any of these characters from the trailer even once in my playthrough. To my surprise, even the menus and upgrade systems have been streamlined, just like I hoped for, and are now much clearer instead of feeling bloated just for the sake of seeming deep again. One of my biggest complaints about Eternal, its excessive handholding despite aiming to be a hardcore shooter, has also been toned down here. No more video tutorials and tutorial chambers before a fight, you've got to figure out the patterns on your own. But considering this is an M-rated hardcore game, and considering that I'm not playing on easy or normal, there are still too many intrusive tutorial boxes in my opinion, especially early on. At least these info boxes are easier to dismiss and move on from. In Doom Eternal I was irritated by the internet pop-ins, and also I was pretty offended, like many people, when they wanted you to create a Bethesda account to replay the original Doom 1 and 2 a while back. Unfortunately, Dark Ages made things much worse. Despite being small enough to fit on a disc, Bethesda only included an 80 megabyte download activator, making the physical version redundant and actively undermining your right to own this game. However, the full scope of this discussion exceeds the confines of a Doom review, so I'll not count this as a negative against the game itself as it stands. Besides that, unfortunately, exploration isn't where it should be, despite the developers promoting it as one of the game's key features. Not every game needs to have as little handholding as a Souls-like, but many PS4 generation games still found a much better balance between free exploration and guiding players just enough to prevent confusion, including Doom 2016, where the compass showed the level goal, but you still had to find your way through these labyrinths yourself. Dark Ages uses a breadcrumb-style GPS system that highlights almost every turn you need to make, rather than just pointing you in the right direction. This might sound like a nitpick, but I'll die on this hill. Overt map markers are the bane of modern gaming, because they diminish any true sense of discovery. Thankfully, Dark Ages still has a decent amount of hidden secret areas and interesting collectibles to find, but when the main path is laid out this explicitly, it's like seeing the Matrix Code. The illusion of an organic game world breaks. Following a yellow icon is not exploring, so stop claiming that. There's a couple of sandbox areas where the compass makes a little more sense, but arguably the best levels in Doom Dark Ages remain the traditional corridor mazes and facilities. These more open areas are a little redundant. Speaking of redundancies, there are new spectacle set pieces in a few chapters where the Doomslayer controls giant mechs and rides dragons, which is presented in a bombastic way in in terms of the story, but the gameplay there remains extremely flat. These segments consist of button mashing and super simple rhythm minigames, which are filled with even more tutorials than in the main game. Now, pure action games benefit from breaking up the action with a few simple tasks here and there, but the puzzles and platforming in between the battle areas already did this job in this case anyway. The game didn't need these sandbox levels or the drawn out mech and dragon segments to begin with, because at 15 to 20 hours it's already a little too long, especially since the amount of enemies and parry patterns isn't that high either. You'll see this Bull Rider guy a lot. Dark Ages remains a high quality shooter and a standout sequel thanks to its inventive new take on the formula. But Doom 2016 was lean and focused, a tight, no-nonsense package when it comes to gameplay, content and systems. It also didn't treat players like dummies. Eternal was a decent continuation of the action, but it didn't feel focused at all. An example of why bigger doesn't always mean better. Compared to that, Dark Ages is more concise and feels like a more thought out concept. It only falls short of its full potential due to a few underwhelming diversions and the developers' lingering reluctance to fully embrace a hardcore action identity.